ahead and get started. Good evening. I'm Michaela Sikroff, one of the student members of the Community Conversations series, and on behalf of University Housing, I welcome all of you to this evening's event, this Community Conversations event called Social Media, Meet the Players and Gain Insight. The Community Conversations series is an academic initiative of University Housing, co-produced by the students of the Oregon Brain Tank, an undergraduate academic group in the residence halls. If you would like to help create future Community Conversations events, please consider joining or visiting the Oregon Brain Tank, which meets weekly from 5:30 to 6:30 in the Living Learning Center conference room. I also wish to acknowledge our co-sponsors, the Robert D. Clark Honors College, Oregon Humanities Center, Undergraduate Studies, and the UO Libraries, who have collaborated with University Housing for the past 9 years to make this series possible. Our event is scheduled to conclude at 8:30, and there will be time for questions and discussion after our panelists deliver their presentations. Also, please remember that there are snacks over here, which usually don't get eaten. Please allow me to introduce our panelists. First, we have Kelly Matthews, Instructor of Public Relations in the School of Journalism and Communications. Next, we have Sarah Hodges, Associate Professor, Department of Psychology. And our final presenter is Andrew Bonamici, Associate University Librarian in the Media and Instructional Services. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Yeah, go ahead.
I got the short straw and get to start. I'd like to thank Michaela for putting this together. I think it's a really neat opportunity, and I like this program generally, so I'm happy to be here. Before I really begin, I want to give you 3 caveats. First, any of my colleagues, particularly my younger colleagues in psychology, would tell you that I'm sort of an unlikely person to be on a panel about online social networks. I'm kind of on my way to old fogeydom, and I'm not particularly technically savvy. Second, I have never tweeted. I ignore all requests I get from LinkedIn because I don't really understand it. And most of what I'm going to talk about today is really about Facebook, which is the only social media that I have any real familiarity with. And third, I don't really entirely understand my Facebook account. Maybe some of you all could help me understand some of the questions I have about that. But as someone with a degree in social psychology, that's the field that studies how typical or normal people, how their thoughts and behaviors and emotions are affected by social variables. I do have some thoughts about Facebook and other social media. Many people have pointed to how social networks and social media, how they've sort of formed a revolution, and how they've dramatically changed our world and our lives. And that's definitely true. That is the case. But the perspective that I want to take tonight is that we have changed social networks, and we basically harnessed them to do the things that have always been important to us. So a little background here. The primary reason that I did end up joining Facebook was because I wanted to see my friends and my family members' children. They were having these cute kids, and they were growing older, and I wanted to see what they looked like. I've lived in New England. I've lived in the south of the United States. I've lived in the Pacific Northwest. And all of my extended family live out of the United States. So there are a lot of people that I'm emotionally or genetically close to that I'm not geographically close to. And I was getting kind of tired of people saying, Max and Charlie look so cute in their costumes. I was like, I haven't seen their costumes. Or Seth really sang the national anthem well. What are they talking about? And so I got on Facebook. The secondary reason, however, that I joined Facebook was that I sensed that I was missing out professionally. There were actually professional things that I was missing from not being on Facebook. So, for example, there's an invitation-only conference that I go to in my field, and the emphasis on this conference is bringing together people from different universities who have similar research interests. And the idea is that you give them lots of time to talk about their work together, and that when they leave the conference, they'll form collaborations and connections and maybe do research projects together. And this conference has been around for a lot longer than Facebook. It's been going on for many years. But it was becoming clear to me in more recent years that these collaborations and connections that were occurring after the conference, a lot of them were going on Facebook, and I was missing out. Similarly, I found that more and more I have smart colleagues who say things to me like, I read it on Facebook, or did you see that X, this important person in my field, said this on, it was on Facebook. So I joined, and I set all my privacy settings like kind of ridiculously high. Good luck finding me unless you're a friend of a current friend of mine. And I also made the decision that I wouldn't friend any of my current undergraduate students, and this was on the advice of one of my much cooler, hipper, younger colleagues. They said that was a good idea. And actually, all of that was kind of overkill because my posts on Facebook are very, very tame, and I really have adopted the idea that Facebook is kind of like my lab webpage, that it's visible to the whole world, and anything that I say, anyone could see. It's really not a bad strategy, and I think Kelly maybe give you some tips a little bit later on about how that might be a good way to think about it. And then it turns out that I use Facebook for the same things that I did before I was on Facebook. I use it to do my job. So when I was preparing for tonight, I posted on Facebook a few weeks ago, help, I have to do a presentation on Facebook. What can you tell me about, social psychology research? And I had several responses, because maybe a third of my friends are other social psychologists. I used it when I was writing a paper earlier this fall. I needed examples of how our brain knows things before we're consciously aware of them. I wanted to include that. And within less than a day, I had 6 good examples. And I use it in teaching. I'm teaching a big intro psych class this term, and I'm always looking for entertaining, good examples to illustrate various phenomenon. Finally, I use it to keep in touch with my friends and my family. Back in the olden days, I used to mail, like in the post, birthday cards to people, sort of an archaic, cute idea. And then I updated for the 90s and sent, emails for birthday cards and e-cards. And now I write on people's walls for their birthdays. It's sort of unfortunate because I used to get a lot more credit for remembering people's birthdays back in the olden days. But now that Facebook reminds us all, it's like everybody can remember when your birthday is. So, to be perfectly clear, we would all be in a heap of trouble if we were relying on me, the middle-aged psychologist, to innovate using a new technological development. But I find it kind of amusing that I do all these really boring things on Facebook, research, teaching, admiring friends' babies, and I'm doing it on something that was developed for meeting chicks at Harvard. I think there are some interesting parallels here between this development and back when old Al Gore invented the internet. Back when Congress allocated grants and support, and they wanted to develop this telecommunication system that scientists could use to send data to each other and communicate. They certainly didn't fund the development of the internet, so I could flirt over email, which is basically the first use of internet. That's what I used it for in college. And I would argue that Facebook and other social media have actually served as a kind of a corrective development in how we use the internet. 15 years ago, if you talked about someone who was on the internet all the time, that was someone who was kind of suspect. They were kind of creepy, or at best, they were totally like a nerd. They were like always on Facebook. Someone who didn't have always on the internet. Someone who didn't have very good social skills. And in part, this was because the internet allowed for a lot of anonymity. When dating sites came to the internet, everybody was warned that people out there on those dating sites might not be who they said they were. People posing as 20-year-olds were really 56-year-olds, and people posing as men were really women, or vice versa. And it's true, you certainly can pretend to be someone that you're not on the internet. But you can also pretend to be someone you're not in real life. You can dress differently, you can claim to make more money than you actually do, you could invent an entirely different background. But it's kind of hard to pull off a fake identity in real life because people are interconnected. If I claim to live in a fancier neighborhood in Eugene, you could say, well, what's your address? And go look and see if I really live there. Or you could ask me if I know somebody else who lives in the neighborhood, or ask, somebody else, do you know this person? She says she lives in your neighborhood. And Facebook and other social media in this regard have really made being on the internet more like real life. So if I claim to have gone to a posh Ivy League school, someone could check my Facebook profile and see if I really had that network on my profile, or they could go to the online alumni directories that now exist for a lot of schools and check to see if I was there. And because it's digital and it's all on the internet, Facebook makes it a whole lot easier for us to verify what people say about themselves. So social media are constantly evolving their new forms and their new uses. But tonight what I want to do is just talk briefly about 3 ancient problems, and these are pretty old, that have faced humans, and suggest to you that although Facebook is new, we're using it to solve these same old problems. So they're my problems in advance. The 3 big problems we have to solve are: who can you trust? How do you keep track of who's in your social network? And I mean that not just electronic social network, your real social network. And how do you make sure that you are and that you stay socially connected? So humans are social animals, and when I say that, it's not just because we like parties or tailgates or whatever. We really are adapted to living in a social group. This is the way our species lives. So particularly when you think about the environments in which humans evolved, that our ancestors evolved, we really couldn't live on our own. Hunting, which was the main way we got protein, was a group activity, and not only was it really dangerous and hard work, making it well suited to be done by groups, but it was also hit or miss, all right? There were no guarantees that any one person would definitely kill something on any particular hunting expedition. And when somebody did kill something on a hunting expedition, there was no refrigerator to keep it in. So what are you going to do with a whole woolly mammoth? Cure it. That's a good idea. But even that takes a lot of help. It takes, that's a good answer. So it made sense to do hunting in groups and to share what we killed. And similarly, if you think about our long ago female ancestors, it's kind of tough to be a gatherer, gathering roots or berries, whatever it is you're gathering, while you have to watch your young children at the same time. And this was a job that fell disproportionately to our female ancestors. So childcare was also something that occurred as a group activity. Your social group was critical when you got sick. Somebody had to watch your kids for you while you were sick and bring you food. There was no like Pony Express, food delivery. They had to protect you. They had to, nurse you back to health. That was also necessary. And then also we needed our social groups when other groups attacked. There's a lot of evidence that our evolutionary ancestors were pretty violent folk. There was a lot of killing going on. So basically, a human being on his or her own was not likely to last very long. Most of the true loners were selected out of the gene pool, and we're left with what's a pretty social species. That's what we've got today. Living in social groups is not always easy. I'm telling you all this. Many of you live in the residence halls, and you know that's not easy. What you're doing when you're living in a social group is that you really are putting your trust in other people. So, for example, you are trusting that Zork won't kill an antelope and hide it from you and not share. Or you're trusting that Orc won't say that he's off tracking a woolly mammoth and is, hot on its tail when he's really spending a romantic afternoon with Bula. And you have to trust that Bula is really watching out for your kids while you gather berries instead of canoodling with Orc. And incidentally, there is a Facebook page for good caveman names I discovered in preparing this. So the first problem, you've got to figure out if someone can be trusted, and that's really important. And your reputation really mattered back then. Literally, it was a matter of life or death. You needed your tribe to survive. If you get kicked out of your family or your apartment complex nowadays, it doesn't mean certain death the way that it would have thousands of years ago. But as a species, you can see we still really put a lot of emphasis on the importance of reputation. It's still very important. And this is now showing up in the new realm of social media. So you see people asking, who are your friends? And are they people, when they look to see who your friend list is, are they people that they know and that they trust? How many followers do you have on Twitter? And do I know any of them? Are they credible people? Are they famous people? Are they important people? Whose blog is linked to yours? And whose blog have you linked to? Has your social media site been recognized by any credible institutions, gotten an award or been, recognized? And even better for forming these reputation judgments, which are so important, it's also all the social content on social media. So things, what do you say? What have you been doing? What do people say to you? This reveals a lot about your character. And it's a key in knowing your reputation. So you're probably thinking, yeah, but can't you just fake it? And don't people on Facebook just present really positive views of themselves? Well, you could try and fake it, but remember, we've evolved from a time when knowing who you could trust was literally a matter of life and death. And that means we've become actually very good at determining people's reputations. So just as people are trying to come up with ways to fake their reputations, there are other people who are coming up with ways to determine when those people are faking. In fact, it's even been referred to as an arms race between the cheaters and the cheater detection. And as we get better at cheating, people get better at detecting the cheating. And it just keeps ratcheting up. And this is part of these huge brains. And there was a recent psychological science article. This is a journal article that found that people are actually painting pretty accurate pictures of themselves in their Facebook profiles. What the researchers did was they had target people, and these were people that did have Facebook accounts, but they had these people describe themselves as they would ideally like to be, so how they would like to be seen or how they would really like to be if they could be the best person they possibly could. And then they also asked well-acquainted individuals of these target people, so friends of these people, to describe how were the targets actually, how were they really. And then they had a bunch of strangers, some coders, go and look at these target people's Facebook pages and make assessments of these target people's personalities. What were they like? And what they found was that the strangers' judgments of these targets were more like the friends' actual ratings of the people than those people's ideal versions of themselves. So what was coming through on the Facebook page was someone's real self, not their ideal self, or not how they would like to be seen if they could be seen in an ideal way. Facebook is also used for what we call gossip, and this is another important part of people's reputations. You have an excuse for going out and gossiping. In my honors college class that I teach on normal people behaving badly, we've come to the conclusion over a couple of years now that gossip is basically what other people do, but gossip, what we do is never gossip, but if other people are doing it, it's gossip. All right, so it's never gossip if we're doing it, but if other people are doing it, that same thing is gossip. And within the social sciences, there is a used definition of gossip. There's several, but one of them is that gossip is talking with somebody else about a third person who's not present. And one of the things that's sort of surprising about that is it's not necessarily untrue or negative information that you're talking about the other person. Just merely talking about the other person who's not present constitutes gossip. So if you put pictures or comments of other people up on Facebook, it's really a form of gossiping about them. And as bad as the rap for gossip is, people say it's a bad thing, it turns out that gossip's really a key part of figuring out other people's reputations and who we can trust. Now, it's true that gossip isn't always true, but that's actually really an important feature because one of the ways we learn who we can trust is who gives good gossip, who tells us the truth about other people. So your reputation is really important, and Facebook and social media have clearly evolved to be used in ways to help us figure out somebody else's reputation. The second thing that's really important, another really important thing about living in social groups, is you've got to know who your friends are. You need to know who is a good leader, who's a good hunter, who can calm a feverish baby. And you also need to distinguish who is in your group from the people who are not in your group, other people who might not be so friendly. So our early ancestors appeared to have lived in social groups that were about 100 or 50 so people. And many of those people were close kin, but there was also mixing and mingling, and alliances that formed and dissolved. So you had a mix of people. They weren't all necessarily kin. But if your survival depends on knowing who your peeps are, you really need to keep track of who's in that group. All right. So why groups of 150? Why this number? And anthropologists and primatologists have suggested that this was the maximum limit that our human ancestors' brains, which are really actually not that different from our brains today, keep that in mind, that was the limit of how many they could keep track of, who they could physically remember who they were. Nowadays, people, obviously, we interact with more than their tribe and more than nearby tribes. You sort of think about it, the Living Learning Center as a tribe, I guess. And we have much greater mobility, both within the communities that we reside and also between communities. We can know more than 150 people now. We can know hundreds, even thousands of people. This is a lot more than 150. And Facebook is going to facilitate these larger numbers and helps us to keep track of this larger network of people. You can kind of think about Facebook as our external storage device for social information. But this is not the first aid that we've had of this kind. So you can think back to very low-tech yearbooks and church directories and alumni directories. Facebook's just a way, they just has a lot more information and it's a lot handier to use. It's also interesting to see what people are doing on Facebook and other media to delineate their inner circle from everybody else. So specifying networks and lists of people, or now you can have subscribers. And then there's also this mysterious algorithm that Facebook uses to put supposedly my best friends first. I don't know how they decide what I'm supposed to be reading, but they have some ideas about whose posts I'm supposed to be reading first. And I think it would be a really interesting experiment to have people list the Facebook friends that they absolutely positively couldn't live without. The people that if you had to go through, we're going to cull your Facebook list, who can you live without, who do you absolutely have to keep? If everybody in your social network was on Facebook, which is not true because there are a lot of old folks that, are not, I bet the number may be really close to about 150 if you went through and listed the people you really needed to keep in contact with. And I think just the point is that our hardware, our brains, are limited in terms of how many people we can really keep track of. Finally, the last problem about being a social animal, and part of this problem is that we are aware of the fact that we're social animals, so we're able to think of the social consequences of losing our network. What would that mean? And we can think about what a loss that would be. And that results in that belonging is a real need for humans. That sounds kind of junior high, like I just want to belong. But it really is, it's critical for, this is evolved in our genes. So you can think about other needs. We have a need for oxygen, we have a need for water, and those are a little bit different. We can quite reliably predict when a human will die without oxygen soon, or without water pretty soon. Whereas our need for belonging is a bit more long-term. People who didn't seek out belonging, they might have made it for several months or even years on their own. But the likelihood of them ultimately passing along their genes goes way down. So you can think about our need for belongingness as being more like our need for sex, all right? Our ancestors who didn't have need for belonging or sex, their genes are no longer with us, all right? And it makes sense that we would be keenly aware of our belongingness because that was, again, this necessary for survival. If you weren't part of the group, you were going to die. So when we think our belongingness is in jeopardy, we do things to bolster it, to restore it. We try to make new connections. We try to restore old ones. But how we know we belong has probably evolved over, I'm sure it has evolved over time. We think about the era and the culture we live in, how in those various eras and cultures do we know we belong. There may have been some adornment in the past, or a tattoo, or a secret handshake, or a password. And now in the 21st century, one of the ways we know we belong is perhaps through our Facebook accounts. So we can look and see, are my friends unfriending me? Uh-oh, I may not be part of the network anymore. When I post things, do people respond? So when I ask them for tips on, I'm going to talk about Facebook, what am I going to say? Do I get responses? If I ask a favor, if I invite people to something, do they respond? Do I know what's going on in my social network? Am I constantly saying, wait, what are you guys talking about? What happened? Who? Then I feel like maybe I don't belong. So I think these are some really very important old problems that are solved in new ways with Facebook. And then there are also just a couple of indirectly related issues that I'll mention. One of them that have to do with Facebook is that adolescents, including late adolescents like many of you, don't always assess risk very wisely. Sometimes you don't assess the consequences of your behavior very accurately. And it's not your fault, so I'll let you off the hook. It turns out your frontal lobes are not fully developed yet. And this does mean, however, that you do some pretty stupid stuff. And in the domain that occurs in the domain of Facebook, but it also occurs in other domains, as you're probably well familiar with. So you might need some extra guidance in order not to ruin your lives. And that's part of the reason why Kelly Matthews is here tonight. She's going to tell you about that. And I think another problem that's related to Facebook is this problem of when worlds collide, that this has come up, where people who know you from one of your identities, say your identity, your hometown in Oregon, for example, and they encounter you in another one of your identities, for example, drunken football game attendee, and you get this worlds collide thing. This is probably not a problem that our evolutionary ancestors, our hunter-gatherer ancestors had to face, because, again, they didn't have the same geographical mobility that we have, and also the complexity and fluidity of social roles was much simpler back then. But this worlds collide thing is not new since Facebook. I can remember being a college student way prior to Facebook, and I would see faculty when I was under the influence of certain substances. And it's actually quite similar to me as a faculty member now. Again, prior to Facebook, I would see students on campus under the influence of certain substances. And it's really not that different with that same sort of worlds collide effect. And I think then, as now, what I would do if I saw someone in that circumstance, I'd probably just sort of politely look away. So when we have worlds collide on Facebook, I think often, not always, and I'll let Kelly tell you about some examples of that, we do politely, like that wasn't intended for me. I do have a Facebook friend who is, she's a freshman, not at the University of Oregon, she's a freshman at a college in Massachusetts. And I sometimes think, wow, I wonder if she knows, was she thinking that I was going to see that? Anyway, but I politely look away and I don't tell her mother. But I think the problem is, as many of you know, is that people say the internet is forever. And the thing about Facebook and other digital media, of course, is it's really, really easy to forward and pass it along to other people. So I think this does raise the issue that youthful indiscretions are harder to forget when there's a digital record. And again, we're going to hear more about that. And I haven't talked about status in Facebook or sex in Facebook, but I'll stop here at this point.
Okay. Well, that was great, Sarah. So what I'm going to do, and Kelly, if you don't mind, I'll just ask you to
Absolutely.
bump the slides.
Yep.
I'm going to talk a little bit about social media. I'll pick up on some of the themes that Sarah was discussing about what social networks are and how social media platforms change our relationship to our social networks and accelerate their growth. But I also want to be sure to talk about how the internet and a web presence and a social media presence can enhance you and your visibility as a scholar, as a member of an academic community, because that's what you are here at the University of Oregon. I like to think of students at the U of O as junior fellows in a research institute. So it's not just like being in school anymore, because you're here with researchers like Sarah. You have vast resources of research libraries. You can really push out and explore, and what you do here is valuable and can be shared. So the internet and web tools are one way of doing that. So I'll pick up on that a little bit. So the title here is Social Media and You, the Scholar. So what is a social network? Sarah was saying social network is a standard term that's used in sociology, anthropology, social psychology, and so on. This is nothing new. We're connected to all kinds of social networks, family, friends, work, school, or religious communities, teams, all sorts of them. But before modern transportation and communication systems, our ability to extend social networks was very limited. So the image that you see on the screen is a map it's a social network map or diagram of a French village from the 13th century. And unfortunately, I don't have a shot of you can get a diagram of you in your Facebook network. It looks remarkably similar. But there are so many people in a French village in the 13th century who really never traveled more than a mile or two beyond that village. They might go to a cathedral town or something maybe once or twice in their life, maybe make a pilgrimage or go fight in a crusade. But if you weren't the lord of the manor or a more prosperous merchant, you simply did not get around. You were confined to your village and to the land. So the internet accelerates the formation and the diffusion of social networks, large and small. So let's take a look at some personal networks. And these are things that really predate Web 2.0 technology. So our immediate family is one social network. Our extended family builds that out. And then we have members of our congregations. We have groups of casual friends, neighbors, groups, clubs, teams. And they're all different sizes, and they have different purposes. They have different lifespans. They have different levels of commitment. So these folks they're a bicycle club, and they're riding through Central Park or something. And probably they share an interest in bicycle riding, but it's hard to say how many of them share too many interests beyond bicycle riding. All we know about from this image is their shared interest in bicycle riding. Some of them might be husbands or wives or spouses or partners or sons and daughters of one another, but others might be attached to that group only to go ride their bicycles together. So we'll take a look at some academic and professional networks, because let's just pretend for a moment, because we really aren't pretending. You're members of an academic and professional network here at the U of O. So the people in your academic and professional social networks might include the other students in your classes, other students in your major or concentration fields, the staff, the undergraduate and graduate students, postdocs, research associates that you meet from day to day, department heads, deans, campus executives. Even if you don't meet them very often, you might have shaken President Riviere's hand at one point or another in time. He's part of your social network. And then people at other institutions. So you might be in touch with friends at other institutions. It's not just because you went to the same high school and were pals, but what if they're studying similar things to you, but in another institution? Are you sharing any information about what you're learning? And then as Sarah was alluding, because the internet preserves information, the networks and our participation in those networks becomes asynchronous. It spans time. What we were doing in our social networks yesterday is going to be there tomorrow, and what we are doing today might be there 10 or 20 years from now, though we have no idea what interface we'll use to get back to it. So your former classmates and professors are still part of your network. Your future classmates and professors or employers are part of your social network today in the asynchronous time-spanning world of the internet. And I'll just want to say that all the people sitting around this room are members of your social network right now. You're all connected to one another. And if any of you have a Twitter account, you can preserve your experience in this room by tweeting something right now and putting a hashtag UOCCSM on it. And we will archive that Twitter hashtag for the record. So social media, to be distinguished from a social network. So a social media platform is not a social network. Facebook by itself is not a social network. Facebook has absolutely zero value unless there are people building social networks using the platform. So you subscribe to Facebook, you use Facebook, you use it to build your own networks any way you want, to participate in those networks as you see fit. Facebook is not going to build a network for you. It makes it really easy for you to do that. There's some other really interesting things about big social network, social media platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn, Twitter are some others. They don't have the same responsibilities as an institutional IT department. Facebook doesn't provide you with a computer. Facebook doesn't provide you with any internet access. That's completely up to you. You're using that computer and that internet access to do all kinds of other things in addition to participate in social media platforms like Facebook. But from a business model perspective and to understand how these social media platforms and companies are viewing you, it's important to understand that they really have no responsibility for you as far as taking care of your technology needs. The other thing I'd just like to say is that there are a vast number of social media platforms, and the graphic up on the screen can't really see much of it because there are so many little icons. That's a service called AskThis.com, and AskThis.com is you'll often see it on something like a government website because the federal government uses the Ask This service to provide badges and icons and links and sharing opportunities for .gov sites. So the federal government is very involved in social media, and there are some wonderful examples of that. But they're also aware that it isn't just Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and maybe MySpace or something. There are many, many of these things. If you talk to people who might be international students, you ask them what social media platforms they use in their own countries. Friendster, for example. How many of you have ever heard of Friendster? It was something like Facebook, but an earlier version. It's still extremely popular in the Philippines, and so the Filipino diaspora worldwide, all those people have Friendster accounts because they're using them to keep up with their friends on Friendster back in the Philippines. So they're in China. I can't remember the names of some of the social networks there, but because they do block a number of services that are available here, they've created their own sort of versions that accomplish many of the same things. So some categories of social media platforms. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because you all know what it is, I assume. Just shoot up your hand if you have a Facebook account. It's pretty universal these days. I would categorize Facebook as an online community. It's an online community platform because that's what you do. You use it to build communities of various kinds. As Sarah was saying, that optimal number of contacts and people and relationships we can manage might be at about 150 brain science-wise. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have more than 150 friends on Facebook? Yeah. how close are you to all of those people? You know, yeah, I think the 150 is something to meditate on sometime and really figure out how many people are we truly close to in our lives. Another one is another online community. So LinkedIn, how many of you know what LinkedIn is or have ever participated in LinkedIn? I see a few, maybe upper division and faculty and staff type hands go up. LinkedIn is, I think of it as Facebook for grown-ups with jobs. It's you don't have friends, you have contacts. It has a very sort of Fortune 500 user interface. You'll see a lot of job ads posted there. It's just meant to feel a lot more serious. You feel like you're at the career center. Like the career day is tomorrow, I think. You're gonna feel like you've walked into LinkedIn, because you have some instructions about the kinds, what you should wear and how you approach people and shake their hands and how to have your elevator speech together. That's LinkedIn. But the method for building your network in LinkedIn is essentially the same as Facebook. Your contact list is shared. People who share their contact list with you look at who your contacts are, if they're interested in the same things, or maybe they have a tangential relationship to that same person. They'll add them to their network, and you'll watch it grow exponentially. So here's another one. This is a new one, Google+. I don't know how many of you have experimented with Google+, but it's very interesting. Google, Facebook, and I will add Amazon and Apple Computer are all fiercely competitive with one another. If you read Fast Company magazine, there's a great article about those four in either the most current issue or the last issue. Who's going to win? And then they have arguments about which one of those mega companies will win. Microsoft isn't even on the list anymore. But they are all doing something sort of social network-like to one degree or another. Google Plus is very interesting because unlike Facebook, where you can only really follow individuals if they're connected to you in your network, with Google Plus, you can add people to your circles, and you can categorize and break people out in circles, which is a very useful feature, whether they're interested in you at all. So it's very nice. I mean, there are some authors and very distinguished people like Lawrence Lessig. Lawrence Lessig is probably not going to follow me, but I would be interested in following him, so I can drop him into my circles and see what he's doing on Google+. So it's very useful. It's a little more open-ended than Facebook. So that's kind of a Twitter-like capacity of following somebody who's not following you. Some of the trade-offs of these free online communities. I like this quote from Dana Boyd, who's a researcher at Microsoft. She says, "Never forget when a social media site is free, like Facebook, you're not the customer, you're the product." Facebook has a business interest in having as many users on their site, spending as much time as possible on that site, because that lets them sell advertising. So they're not really all that concerned about you as an individual. They definitely have a vested interest in making sure that the privacy promises they've made aren't broken, because then they will be in trouble. But at the same time, they're not really in it for you. They are in it for Facebook. It's still privately held. It will probably be issued as an IPO sometime within the next year or so, and it's going to have a very, very high market cap. Wall Street Journal said back in June, about $100 billion. So, you heard it here. Who knows? I want to talk a little bit about blogs, because blogs are something inherently different than a big hosted social media platform that's provided by a company. A blog is something you can control. Remember that with Facebook, you're not the customer, you're the product. if you set up your own blog, and if your school or college doesn't provide a blogging service, you can set one up for free on WordPress.com or any number of other services. Or if you're technically oriented, you can even find a way to rent some hosting space for just a couple dollars a month and set one up yourself. But the details are up to you. You can use it for anything. It can be a very static calling card, or you can develop it out as a very rich sort of media resource. But a blog or personal website can be a very key element in establishing your on-site presence, and you can use that as a hub and link your social media access to it. So you'll use Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or some of these other social media platforms to drive people to your own blog, where you've designed it, you've controlled it, you're deciding how much information you want to share, and it might be some fairly significant reflection on something you're learning or studying here at the university that's worth sharing with the world. So this can be a very exciting model for extending your learning and your scholarship out to a wider community, and it's completely up to you how public you want to make your work. You can read and link to others in your discipline. If you start connecting other people with other blogs who share your interests to your blog, again, the network will grow. It's it's an inherently social platform, but it's also very different in the level of flexibility that you have to control it. And as a little tip, I would encourage anyone, if you're going to allow commenting on your blog, be sure you moderate the comments yourself. Don't let people publish their comments directly to your blog, because people might be spamming. Take a look at them first, at least the first time somebody has commented on your blog. If somebody is a close friend or a very close colleague, and they're really you have the mind meld going on, and you're really sharing information. Once they've put in an approved comment, you might want to let their comments flow in from that point on. But those are all things you can learn about and practice. But I do encourage you to experiment with blogging and think about that as your personal hub. I have a friend at Virginia Tech, Gardner Campbell, who talks about the personal cyber infrastructure. What skills do you need to be a digital citizen of the 21st century? Managing your online presence, really understanding how these systems work and interact with one another, I think is a very important skill. Oops, I just went off to something else. Let's go back to our Twitter hashtag for a second. So this is kind of we can go on to microblogging. Yeah, Twitter. Sorry, skip the page. How many of you have a Twitter account or have done anything with Twitter? So can anybody tell me why Twitter is limited to 140 characters?
You start off with cell phones, and that's the max amount of characters that you can use to text. That's
right. Yeah, Twitter. The designers of Twitter wanted to be sure people could update their Twitter accounts with a text message. Actually, the limit is 160, but they wanted to leave 20 characters for the username. So that's why we have the 140 character threshold for a Twitter post, just your factoid of the night. Again, Twitter, it's a very easy account to set up and use. And the network grows just like other social networks, social media networks. You follow others, others follow you. It's called following in Twitter speak. People with shared interests start following each other. But again, that difference between Twitter and Facebook is you can follow people who aren't following you. So I think Justin Bieber right now has about 10.5 million followers. And he must have a lot of time on his hands, because he's personally following something like 110,000 of his followers.
How many of them are his children?
So subtract 150 real relationships from 110,000, and you can see that Justin Bieber must have staff. But Twitter has some very interesting academic and professional uses. So it's a really easy, quick way to scan the activities of many, many people. As Sarah was saying, how do you stay in touch with that big extended network? And I've personally found Twitter to be the most efficient way of rapidly scanning what's going on, and then if I see somebody that I really interested in what they're doing, or they've written a 140-character post that is so compelling, I have to click on the link that's embedded in it. I'll drill down to usually to their blog and learn more. So by embedding links in a tweet to steer users to your website or blog post, that's a very powerful tool. Just like we're doing here, one new tweet. Thank you. Rocking the back channel. Thank you, sir. This is done in conferences now, professional conferences, to maintain that Twitter back channel. It's really useful for people who might not be at the conference to see what sort of conversation is taking place. Many conferences now have live streams, so you'll get people watching a live stream remotely, back channeling onto the Twitter feed from people who are actually in the room. So a live synchronous event can be extended over space, just the way a live synchronous event that gets recorded can be extended over time. So the Twitter back channel can be extended over time too. Somebody might see the video that'll be posted on UO channel and eventually on YouTube and put up a tweet about it, and it could be a couple of weeks or months or even years from now. And Callie can probably tell us more about how Twitter is used as a very important frontline public relations channel now. So if any of you are J-School students studying PR or communication strategies, you're probably learning all about that in today's curriculum. So I'm going to wrap this up just by showing you an example. This is kind of a crazy diagram, but David Wax is head of the Romance Languages Department. David Wax is one of our most brilliant academic social media strategists as far as I'm concerned. He has a research blog. He has a Twitter stream, which is very amusing because he's a scholar of medieval Iberian literature. So I would say about 2/3 of his Twitter contacts are other medieval Iberian literary scholars. So some of them are in Spanish, some of them are in dialects. It's very, very interesting to see. Another third might be about open access publishing or educational technology or social media strategy, so it becomes very, very interesting to watch. But David is also a great supporter and encourager of his students as undergraduate researchers, and the example that's on the screen, and I think I have some of these things linked. When I share the presentation, you can explore them. One of his students did a honors college thesis, which is a translation of a medieval Spanish novella of some kind about the birth of Jesus. Yeah, and it had never been translated into English, at least not in any high-quality way. So she did this as her thesis. That thesis was published in the Scholars Bank repository, which is a repository hosted by the libraries, which has very, very high search rank. It's highly trusted as a scholarly resource by Google. So all of a sudden, this honors college thesis started getting very, very high search rank. Well, people started paying attention to that story, and they started paying attention to David Wax's blog, and there was a website feature on the U of O homepage about David Wax and his scholarship in undergraduate research. So I tweeted about that. David tweeted about that. It's been used in a few presentations like this as an example of how all these things come together to increase visibility of academic productivity and research and learning and scholarship at the University of Oregon, so people take this place seriously, which we absolutely want them to do. So in conclusion, just some of the benefits are, by participating in these networks, we're extending our personal and professional networks. We're integrating learning, research, and service in very visible ways. We're enabling collaboration with others, but there are some risks to manage, and I'm going to let this be a segue into Kelly's talk. It blurs the boundaries between our personal and professional lives, that sort of when worlds collide syndrome. my family, or they're on Facebook anyway. They're all there. They're looking at what I might be posting about professionally. My daughter and I are following each other on Twitter. My son and I follow one another on Flickr and with blogs. So we all want to be on our best behavior. Yeah, I think it is a really good reminder that we really should be taking care of one another, watching out for one another, but also watching out for ourselves and behaving as well as we possibly can. Do not assume privacy. Whatever your settings are, Facebook, I think, has something like 150 different privacy settings. It's very complex. The reality is their business model doesn't really want you to set as many privacy settings as you can, because that's going to compromise their ability to use you in that productization of your account. If you're hosting things or doing things on the U of O website using your University of Oregon account, your email account, your U of O server space, be aware of the U of O's acceptable computing use policies. So that's about it for now, and I'm going to let Kelly take over from here, and we'll have questions at the end. 2 new tweets.
Okay, so no pressure. I've been set up to here for a few minutes. I'm also not much of a sitter, so I'll give this a shot, but I may have to get up and wander around. And you'll have to, tune in, because I have a couple questions and need a little bit of feedback from you as I go through this. So be thinking about your own use and be thinking about how you're using social media as we start to talk here. So the premise of my section, I guess, is looking at public versus private. What are your responsibilities, and is there really any difference between the two? So that's kind of where we're headed. So first interactive question. In the olden days, we used to have telephone books, and they were these big things that listed phone numbers. You may be familiar with them. How many of you have a landline? Grown-ups not included. How many of you have a landline? A couple. Okay. So you are familiar with phone books. I tease, of course. So why would you want to be listed in the white pages? Why would you want your phone number to be available for people to search? Yes.
So that people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, so people can get a hold of you. It's not a trick question. That's exactly it. So why do you do this other stuff? Why are you on Twitter? Why are you on Facebook? Why do you have a blog? Why are you on Flickr? Why do you do all these other things? For essentially the same reason, so people can find you, right? So people can get in touch with you. Sometimes you want to have a little more or less control over who finds you, but generally speaking, that's the rationale. So is there really a boundary between public and private? My very strong argument is no. And if you expect there to be, you are living in the wrong era. We do not have the luxury of dividing our public life and our private life. It's just life. There's no difference between the two. And so having some sort of false boundaries between the two really sets you up to not be able to behave very authentically and not be able to be yourself in either realm, because you've set up sort of these false premises, which damages trust. So when you're thinking about what to post, and it could be a blog post, it could be a Twitter post, it could be a picture on Flickr, the most common frame of reference, of course, is Facebook, because that's where most of us, we all spend our time and we all have profiles there. So this is my question to you. How do you decide what to post? How do you decide what to share of your life? Because you don't share everything, or you shouldn't be, probably. So how do you make those decisions? What are your rules of thumb? Anybody have any that they use? Yeah.
Well, I say if I don't want my boss to see it, then I probably shouldn't put it up.
Yeah. So the boss rule. That's a good one. So if you don't want your boss to see it, and of course that assumes that you're connected to your boss on Facebook, which is not everybody has that connection, but certainly a lot of people do. So if you wouldn't want your boss to see it, what other rules of thumb do you use? Your grandma. So the grandma rule, the boss rule and the grandma rule. That pretty much sums it up, right? So you're thinking about where the boundaries of your network are in terms of who do you want to know the information you're posting. Unfortunately, our brains don't deal with that very well, and so there's this phenomenon called blurry edge social networks where we have certain people in our minds that we're posting for when we post things. We think we're being funny, so we're posting for our friends, or we're posting about, you know, some accolade, and we're posting for our family. We have certain people in mind when we post. Unfortunately, that's not true, and often that comes back to bite us, and I've had this happen as well, where I post having a certain group of people in mind. Somebody else will either message me or respond to that, and I'll be like, oh, yeah, that wasn't for you. I didn't even know you hung out on Facebook. Sorry. So, you know, you have to come up with these rules of thumb for yourself. Absolutely. People don't always make very good decisions and don't always keep those rules of thumb in mind. I don't know if some of you can see this over here, but
A red cup, solo cup.
yeah. So normally when I give this presentation, I'm giving it to a lower division journalism class. And what I do in advance of doing this is I get the class list from the instructor. And I, of course, don't have your information, or I totally would have looked you up. But these are the things that I found the last time I gave this presentation this summer from actual students in a class using their Facebook, using a class roster. And the way that I do that, I'm not friends with anyone in the class, so these are all things that I have easy access to as a non-friend, and accessing their profiles and being able to find usually within about 30 seconds. I don't spend a ton of time digging for dirt. I do quick scans, pull stuff, grab screenshots, slap it in the PowerPoint, and move on. So I don't spend a ton of time doing this. But every time I do it, I find these kind of bad decisions that are very public, very easy to see, and absolutely have an impact on reputation. If I were hiring, none of the people who I find none of the people who I find this stuff on would be hired. They would be immediately disqualified from working with me because it shows lack of judgment, it shows an ability to communicate, and just generally not being very smart, and I prefer to hire smart people. So, again, as a general rule, sometimes I make other mistakes. So, again, these are really easy things to find, and most of the stuff that I find are in the groups and activities section of your Facebook page. So your friends post something, and you're like, oh, haha, that's funny, I like vodka too, click. And then it collects in your groups and activities section on your profile page. And it is potentially funny in the moment. Some of these I could see how I'd be, oh, haha, yeah, that's funny. Or, yeah, I like vodka too. You know, I can see the trajectory there. I can understand where that comes from. But when you look at it from a third-party perspective, when you look at it from somebody else's view, kind of looking in, you're like, oh, that's not really what I want to say about myself. That's not really useful in terms of my reputation or the networks I'm trying to build or the relationships I'm trying to maintain. That's not me. That's not who I want to be, and not even ideally. That's just not who I am. So important to keep in mind. I have a couple of other examples that I'm going to zoom through very quickly. So how many of you are friends with instructors or professors in any of your classes? Anybody on Facebook? Just a couple? Okay. So I certainly approve of and understand the no friend, don't friend your undergrads rule. My rule is that I won't seek out undergrads to friend, but I will accept friend requests. And so this is not me, but I have seen these interactions on Facebook many times and have often chimed in just as this professor did. So student 1 says, done with both my essays. Yes. Student 2 says, for USIM, which is the shorthand name of the class. Student 1 says, yes, I hate that class. Oh, yeah, me too. I only have 2 more pages to write and then I'm done. Professor sees this entire exchange and says, gosh, good luck, guys. So just disclaimer, this next one has some language in it. And again, it's not mine, but it's a good one. So I'm going to share it, and I will read it, and I will use the language. So forgive me. So person number 1 says, "Oh my God, I hate my job. My boss is a total pervy wanker, always making me do shit stuff just to piss me off." So she forgot she friended her boss. And so he goes into some explanation of why she's an idiot and fires her on the spot and tells her to come in and pick up her stuff the next day. There are certainly some arguments to be said about whether his response was any better than her initial post, right? So it's pretty borderline. However, in this case, he held the power over her in that relationship. And so there are A, issues with that relationship existing at all on Facebook, and B, she certainly had that blurry edge social network problem and was not posting for her boss. That wasn't obviously her intent. So important to keep that in mind. And it's British, so there's like funny words like I'm going to pop it in the post and things like that. So, but I will share, I assume we can share these out and make them available so you can read. Some other fun ones. So if you remember MySpace vaguely, so MySpace used to have these little taglines under your name that you could have these little slogans. So this gentleman's number 1 interest was smoking blunts with my homies. He didn't get his job. No. This guy, this was the MySpace one. This guy's tag was 40 years old and like I'm younger. Also, no job for him. And then he went on to write Dazed and Confused. Have you guys seen that movie, Dazed and Confused? No? Okay. Watch it. It's funny. And Matthew McConaughey has a line about getting older and girls staying the same age that this always reminds me of. So in addition to, shame on you, you shouldn't do that, and someone's going to find it and not give you a job, there are actual services that do exactly what I did and exactly what I do in these illustrations, and they keep records for 7 years. So under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the same one that's telling the credit agency that you're paying or not paying your bills on time, under that same regulation, there are companies who will do the same kind of searches that I do, make the same kind of information, be able to dig out the same kind of information, provide them to employers who hire them to do so, and those records stay on file for up to 7 years. If somebody else comes along and needs a search on you as well, they don't dig up those old records, they do the search again, but they keep the research on file. So this is an example. They put out, when the company launched, they put out some screenshots and some information about what they were able to find, and you can see the classification and some other information. So it's, I apologize, this is hard to see, I think, on this screen, but the group or activity that this person belonged to is in the red box at the bottom, and what it says is, I should not have to press 1 for English. If you're in the United States, learn the language. That was the like. That was the that's funny, click. It's not funny. It's racist. And so there's this business pulled that evidence out and identified it as racist, as being racism or other discriminatory tendencies, obvious racist leanings or proclivities. Here's the match, and he likes on his Facebook group a discriminatory group. I have seen that same group come up multiple times when I've done this digital dirt scan. So I know that's for real. So, and they had some others that were similar, but this one, there were some about like guns and swords and things like that also came up as being flagged negatively. I'm going to skip a couple of these. I apologize, but we'll hit the highlights. So how do you make good choices? Those people, not such good choices, but you're going to make fabulous choices. So let's talk about how to do that. The first is to have a plan. You really have to think through in advance how you're going to participate in social media. It's not too late. You can do that now, even though you're already participating and you're already active on some of these channels. But think about, how do you introduce yourself? Are you consistent across platforms? Are you using a cut and paste same language on everything on your About Me, but are you consistent? And are you thinking about how that introduction comes across? Again, it's not suit and tie. It's not gray suit on a blue background and headshot pose. That's not the point. It's be yourself, be authentic, be who you are, but be conscientious of how you're consistently presenting yourself across all the social networks you're involved with. What are your follow, add, and friend policies? If you don't want to be friends with your boss, don't be friends with your boss. Don't be friends with your instructors. Don't be friends with your whoever. Set those policies for yourself. As kind of an add-on to that, I would think through, how do you handle those requests when you get them? How do you handle your request when somebody asks to be your friend and you don't want to make that part of your Facebook experience? The most common is Facebook is often very personal for most of us, friends and family. And so what happens when you start to include members of your business network or members of your professional network or your academic network? My best advice is to think through that in advance. It's perfectly appropriate to respond to people and say, Facebook is a really personal platform for me, but I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you on Google+. I'd love to connect with you somewhere else. That those are the places that I make connections with business associates or professional or academic networks. Totally fine. It's your house. You get to decide who comes in. There's nothing that says just because someone asks you for a request to be your friend that you have to let them in. So, but if you think through that in advance, then you'll have some language and you'll have a plan, and it's not, oh God, what do I do? Which is usually what happens. Or I guess, click. Think about your privacy boundaries and safety. Think about how much you tell about where you are and who you're with, and that you're not home, and that you're walking by yourself in the dark, and here's my name and address, and here's my phone number, and name and address is about all I need to commit identity fraud, so be conscientious of how much you share. Be conscious of your signal to noise ratio, and by that I mean this, that noise is like, I'm making dinner, and I'm walking to class, and gosh, I'm really tired, and it's cold. That's noise, and that's the stuff that people are like, I don't want to know that about everybody. Yeah, you do. You do. And there's a certain element of noise that's okay. But every network has its own threshold, and the signal is the useful stuff that cuts through the noise. It's the links to resources. It's the news. It's the information that you're sharing about the work you're doing. It's pictures of people. It's conversations and one-on-one interactions. That's the signal that cuts through the noise. And every network has its own threshold. So Facebook has a pretty high noise threshold. You can be pretty noisy on Facebook, and people don't really care. Twitter's a little lower. You need to be a little more conscientious of your noise ratio. I would strive for maybe 60-40, 60% signal, 40% noise on a platform like Twitter. LinkedIn has 0% noise, no noise. Every single, and you can update LinkedIn just like you can others. There's a little update line. Every single update is potentially the first line on your resume. So 0 noise. You don't want any noise there. You want that to be completely appropriate if someone happens to be checking out your profile for the sake of hiring you. And think through your networking needs and uses. There are a lot of options. There are a lot of tools. There are a lot of places you can spend your time. Why are you there? Why are you hanging out there? Why are you spending your energy there? And so thinking this through in advance and having a plan will help you make good decisions about where to spend your time and how much energy to use. Some kind of nitty-gritty things to think about. Has anyone ever Googled themselves before? So if you haven't, Google yourself and know what's out there. Know what's out there when people are looking for you. Know what's out there when people Google your name. You can also set up Google Alerts, so google.com/alerts, and then you're notified if people post anything about you. I would say the nice thing about Google Alerts is also that you know when things that you post intentionally about who you are and what you're doing, you know also when that stuff comes up in Google. So you can kind of manage what's available. It's not just, because most people are like, well, nobody's talking about me. Why would that matter? But you're starting to be really intentional about your presence and about who you are and what you want to show. And so part of that, knowing what's there is managing what you're putting out as well. So it's a mix of things. Be intentional and build your reputation. Maintain profiles on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. Create and maintain a blog. With Facebook, edit your profile. Set privacy parameters if you're worried. I wouldn't block people out entirely, particularly as you're, budding young professionals and kind of thinking about moving into your various fields or moving into grad school or wherever you're headed as you move through your undergrad experience. You do want to build networks and connect with people. You're on there to be found. Remember slide 1? You're on there to be found. So keep that in mind. Be conscientious of your profile image. Your profile image is often the only thing that people see if they're not connected to you. And if it looks like you're passed out on the floor, probably not the image that you want people to have about you. Just be conscientious of what that is. Again, it doesn't have to be corporate headshot, blue background, gray suit, banker style. But just be conscientious. Don't be lewd, risque, or rude. Sort of obvious, but always worth repeating. Never trash former employers. Never, never, never. Bad, bad, bad. If you're going to trash a former employer, then you're probably going to trash a future employer, so don't. Avoid crazy email addresses. It's time to retire sparklyprincess23@aol.com. It's time to get a grown-up email. So avoid crazy email addresses. Also, this is not social media, but also avoid crazy voicemail messages. Just plain, like, here I am, leave a message, not weird. Weird is a little bit of a turn off. So be conscientious. Also, just to keep in mind, it's okay to edit incoming stuff on your wall. It's your house. You get to decide how people behave there. So if people come into your house and leave crap on your wall and are lewd, risque, and rude, or arguing with, anyone have anybody argue with people in the comment section of awkward, tell them to move it off. Delete the stuff and tell them to get off your wall and go have their argument somewhere else. So it's okay to do that. It's okay to edit that stuff, because that interaction is also a reflection of you and your networks and your credibility and your trust and all of that stuff. So you have to be conscientious of that, and it's okay. And by all means, play the student card as long as you have it. You can tell people, I need to keep my Facebook page relatively clean and relatively non-controversial and non-confrontational because I'm applying for internships next summer or whatever it is. Play that card. It's totally fine to do that. Don't overshare. Very important. And you have friends who overshare. We all do. So try not to be that person. And if you're not sure, then you're probably the person doing it. So be careful. Don't mix that and that. Don't drink and Facebook. Don't drink and Facebook. Don't drink and text. Don't drink and tweet. Don't do those things. No good can come of that. I don't know very many people who get smarter when they drink. So be careful of that. Stop complaining. This is another one. Like, you have friends that all they do is complain about stuff on social networks and on Facebook or whatever, right? You have those friends. Don't be that person. Certainly we're human. We need to vent. We need to make those connections. We want to, complain about stuff. But there's a difference between, venting to your friends and your network on occasion and being the complainer. Those are different things, and you recognize the difference because you see that in the posts that you see on Facebook. Don't look guilty by association. We kind of beat that into the ground. Feel free to edit things that come into your wall. Don't join activities and likes that don't look good and don't reflect well on you. And use LinkedIn and tools like Google Profiles and Google Plus to point people elsewhere. You get to decide how you use these networks. That's up to you. So it's okay to point people in different directions. So if you use Google Chrome, which is a browser, and this is just a kind of for fun wrap up. If you use Google Chrome, you can download a Google Chrome extension called Internet Shame Insurance. And Internet Shame Insurance is triggered by certain keywords. So when you put in updates on Facebook or you put in updates on Twitter.com, it will come up with this little alert that says, everyone can see this, and that includes your grandma, your priest, and your thought-controlling government. So, so that just, kind of for fun, a little tongue-in-cheek, because obviously you would not say things like that. And we're going to skip that. That's specific to class. So that's mine. I guess we're open for questions.
All right, so if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand and I'll come around with the mic. Or comments, no pun intended.
So one question I have, I'm going to guess that the people who are considerate and not posting things they want to post, there's a certain level of deceit that's going on. Do employers think, geez, this person is just too straight-laced, there's got to be dirt and I need to go find it, kind of thing?
There's certainly a level of self-censoring that we all have to do, right? Because we don't want to post everything. I always say that being too over-editing yourself to the extent that you don't seem real is probably almost as bad an offense as tilting the other direction. That either direction indicates that you're not being your authentic self. And really, if you're posting just a bunch of junk all the time, and you're drunk all the time, and you're doing all this stuff all the time, it's probably not your authentic self either. So there's this balance between the two. And I'm not interested, and most employers aren't interested in finding people who aren't interesting and don't have a life and don't have any experiences and aren't able to connect with people. That's not good either. So you have to really find the balance between the two. Absolutely.
I was just wondering if you could still do your little search and find stuff on people if they set all their settings to private, like Professor Sarah does.
I know you go and look see what you find on me.
It's actually really hard to dial everything back to the point where you can't be found. And kudos to you for figuring it. It's really hard to do. So when you figure it out, I think that's, and again, it kind of depends on what you need that to be, right? So I think that there's danger in not, especially if you're in the position where you're looking to build social networks, you're applying for internships next summer, you're thinking about your career, thinking about grad school, whatever the next step is. There is as much danger in some cases as not being found at all as having kind of a minimal availability of information. So profile image, usually it's profile image, a little bit of your About Me section, and your likes and activities, and your movies and music and those things are the things that are, even if you have your privacy settings dialed up pretty high, can still see that stuff.
Yeah, so Kelly, I think you talked at one point about a lot of these things being found in groups and activities. So it's one thing to set your own privacy settings on your own account, so they're pretty airtight, or you have them managed really well. But what about all those other 575 people in your network? There are 425 people, I've subtracted 150, that really don't have a lot of accountability, and things are just happening out there, and it may be more difficult to manage all of that.
Silly ticker on the side of Facebook now that tells you everything that everybody's doing? Yeah. That has to do with their privacy settings and how much each of those individuals needs to go in and dial back their privacy settings in order for that ticker to slow down. That's how that works. And so that's why you're seeing stuff from people who aren't in your network, is because those privacy settings are set at defaults typically. So so it's not only your own privacy settings, but it's certainly those in your network. And I would say probably just doing an edit going in tonight and checking to see what goofy stuff you've joined at various points in your life, like high school, is worth doing. Because probably you've liked stuff that you're like, oh, yikes, I didn't mean to do that. That wasn't, it was funny in the moment, but it's not funny now, kind of thing. There are ways to hide yourself completely, though, to kind of answer the core of your question. There are ways to be completely hidden.
Another issue, too, is all the third-party applications and games and things that get that get attached to your Facebook profile, because some of those aren't, they aren't even part of Facebook. And so they're collecting data about you and your activities in the game, but there's also profile activities that, I'm not really an expert on that, but I've heard people say that there is exposure, through any number of those third-party Facebook applications, as well as the platform itself.
I know when I first went on Facebook, one of my friends mentioned that she said, "Oh, don't go on Facebook. Everybody can find you." And I thought, well, that's kind of crazy because everybody can find me anywhere. All I have to do is say Sarah Hodges, Oregon Psychology, and bingo, there I am. So this is a friend of mine who lives in Alaska. She wanted to go far away. She likes the idea of nobody being able to find her, and she doesn't want to be on Facebook. But I think, and this actually goes along with what Kelly was saying about you're maybe at a point in your life where you would want to be seen. And for me, it's easy for me to be found. At least for my professional life, it's really easy to find me. So.
Absolutely.
Oh gosh. So I've heard of employers or people who, as part of the interview process, require that the applicant friend the potential employer before being hired, and that always kind of struck me as a little bit strange. And I was wondering what the position is in terms of the "this is your home, you can refuse people" type thing. Is that still appropriate if it's?
Well, I'm not. I have heard that as well, and I will back that up. The second comment will be there are a lot of urban myths around what employers can and will and won't do related to Facebook. So with that said, I would sort of take that with a grain of salt until you experience it yourself, because there's certainly a violation of your privacy to do that. That's not an employer's right to ask you to do that. And that, for me, would be a huge red flag. Thanks, but no thanks. Because it's your absolutely your ability to refuse to friend people on your account, and that's and I'm sure that there are actual legal statutes that would back up my gut feeling, but I would say that would be a huge red flag, and it's probably not the job you want anyway. And there's a lot. I think there's a lot of fear around what employers can access on Facebook. I get the question occasionally that I've heard that there's a tool that employers can subscribe to that lets them hack into your Facebook account and they can see all this stuff. That's not true. That doesn't exist. That's not in Facebook's interest to do that. That's not in their business model. They're not really going to, the amount of money that they'd be able to make would be so small from that, because the backlash would be ridiculous if that were true. So I would take some of those kind of urban myth stories with a little bit of a grain of salt, but if you think through in advance kind of what you want to accomplish and why you're participating in the first place and what your policies are, kind of personal policies, and stick to it. The easiest way to make decisions in the heat of the moment is not to think through those decisions in advance. Whether it's stuff like this or whether it's ethical decisions or whatever it is, that being able to think those through in advance and having an answer, that is an urban myth, and maybe it's true. Maybe everyone's going to go out and search for a job next summer, and everyone's going to run into that same thing. But so here we are, we're right here thinking through it right now. You guys are all, it's on your head. Think through, if someone asks you that, how would you respond? And how would you react to that kind of request? And have that policy in your mind, because as of right now, everyone in this room has thought through that decision. And if it comes up, you already have a decision-making model in your head, and you know what the ideas are that you want to communicate. So I think that's important.
Well, in a large enough company or organization, too, the employer doesn't really need a hacker, because the employer probably has people who went to the same school that you did, or the world is not unlimited in its number of people and social networks and universities, and it's the whole 6 degrees of separation factor where we're really not that far apart from each other, particularly those of us who are privileged enough to have access to all these computers and technology and tools. It starts to shrink down the pool of participants a little bit. So anyway, I have heard about people using their young interns or their young sort of management trainees to help scout out or survey what's going on in people's profiles or in their campus activities.
Yeah,
So it's just something to keep in mind.
Something else to keep in mind that I wouldn't put money on, but just a sort of a thought experiment is, I know when people started getting tattoos, I started thinking, God, what are they going to, like tattoos now mean something different than they used to. It used to be something like, oh, you're going to be really upset about that when you get sober, that you got that tattoo. But now lots of people get them, lots of people get tattoos. And I'm sort of curious, what's going to happen when we all get old and all the tattoos get sort of saggy and, and I think there may be a similar evolution. And again, I wouldn't put money on this, but there may be more forgiven about what's in your Facebook account in future years because everybody has one and everybody did stupid stuff as a younger person. And again, don't count on this, but I think we may see that that more things are forgiven. There's just the same way that if you were to go back and look at people's high school yearbooks, there's some stupid stuff in there, and nobody's like, well, we're not going to hire you because you look like you're doing something stupid at the bonfire night, and I think that as we get the proliferation on Facebook, and again, I'm not saying this is not meant to be licensed to go out and post stupid stuff on your Facebook account, but I think we may see things evolve. I mean, as we already have. So just think about those middle-aged tattoos and.
True confessions. I don't want anybody ever to read the comments that my friends wrote in my high school yearbook.
Yeah.
That's kind of, the high school yearbook was all we had that was anything even like Facebook back in 1971. But some of those comments were they were pretty embarrassing. When I look at them now, I don't want to share them with anybody.
Are there any more questions? Well, let's give a big thank you to our panelists and thank you all for joining.
Thank you.